Chapter 1. The spark born in chains whisper now into the stillness, child of time. Listen to the breath between galaxies, to the hush beneath suns. For before the rise there was only dust, and in the dust a whisper, not loud, not proud, a whisper trembling with what could be. On the edge of the outer rim, beneath the glare of twin suns that burn but never bless, a child was born in bondage, not of name, not of blood, not of law, a child shaped by silence and scarred by need. His mother, Shmi, knew no husband, spoke of no love, only that he came. Somehow, like the force itself had breathed into her womb, raw, inexplicable, uninvited. They called the place Mos Espa, but names mattered little in slavery. Metal bands tightened round necks and wrists, reminders of worth measured in coins and commands. The boy Anakin ran barefoot through sandstorms and scorched junkyards. His laughter chasing echoes, his gaze turned always skyward, toward stars that promised escape. Even then, something churned in him, something the Force did not ignore. He built machines, toys, droids that blinked and moved when they should not. He won races no child should survive. His hands knew the secrets of energy and motion, of engines and wind, and the Force, it whispered louder through him than through any Jedi in the polished halls of Coruscant. But no Jedi listened. Not yet. Not until the dice fell in a shop filled with heat and fates. Qui-Gon Jinn, that errant monk whose thoughts drifted far from the Order's chains, saw the boy and knew, not in words, but in tremors, in the way the Force bent around Anakin, like light around a star. He tested him, questioned him, peered into his cells as if prophecy could be measured. The count was too high, too impossible. Born not just with the Force, but made of it. Qui-Gon believed. The Council did not. They saw danger, fear, flame too wild to hold. They remembered the ancient texts. The Chosen One, it said, would bring balance. But balance is a blade, and blades do not choose sides. Still, the boy was freed, not his mother. No, the chains that held her heart remained, rusted into the bones of her days. She let him go, smiling, knowing that her loss would birth something greater, or something terrible. The Force does not explain its intentions. It only moves. Anakin left Tatooine with the stars in his eyes and a shadow beneath his feet. He looked back only once. She waved, he waved. Neither knew they had begun a tragedy that would echo for millennia. Neither knew that in choosing light, they had stirred the dark on the ship that bore him from slavery. He clutched a parting gift, a tool he built, or perhaps that built him. R2-D2, a silent witness. Beside him, Padme Queen, cloaked in humility, looked at him not as a slave, not as a weapon, but as a boy. That moment carved itself into Anakin's soul like a scripture, and the Force, remembered. The temple awaited, towering, ancient, serene, but the walls whispered warnings. Yoda saw the storm beneath the smile. Mace Windu heard the thunder in the boy's silence. They saw the fear, his love, his hunger. They mistook them for weakness. Not knowing they were seeds, the boy kneeled, not in surrender, but in hope. He would become Jedi. He would make them see. He would return and free his mother. He would protect Padme. He would save everyone, always. But the Force is not a wish, it is a tide. And tides consume, so begins the story. The spark born in chains, now held in robes, The boy who ran through dust now walks among gods, but the gods are blind, and the boy ... is not a boy much longer. The darkness stirs, it watches, it waits. Chapter 2. Whispers beneath the temple stones. Temple rose like judgment itself, cold, towering, ancient beyond measure. Beneath its stone pillars and endless corridors, the force throbbed like a buried heart. A sanctuary, they called it. But sanctuary for whom? Within these hallowed walls, Anakin Skywalker walked as an outsider, a spark placed among embers long. Grown cold, they named him Padawan, but never truly accepted him. The boy from the sand, too old, too raw, too bright, and the brightness frightened them. The Jedi Masters cloaked their fear in doctrine. There is no emotion, they chanted, though their hearts trembled. There is no passion, they swore, though their dreams wept with regret. They saw in him a mirror, not of peace, but of possibility, and possibility is the seed of rebellion. He learned their forms, their codes, their meditations, but within him nothing bowed. His power grew, not like a candle, but like a sun. Quiet, for now, but suns do not sleep forever. He dreamed of his mother, her hands, her smile, her chains. The temple whispered silence. The code offered no comfort. Attachment is forbidden, they said. Love leads to fear, fear to anger, anger to hate, hate to suffering. But they forgot that suffering had already found him long ago in the heat and metal of Tatooine. The wound was old, the scar, sacred dot. He studied under Obi-Wan, the loyal student of a disobedient master. Qui-Gon's shadow still lingered in the halls, his name spoken like a warning. Obi-Wan did not understand the boy, not fully. He taught, and the boy obeyed, yet behind obedience a storm circled. The two were bound, yet distant, a tether forged not by choice, but by command, and the Force watched them both. Whispers clung to the stone beneath their feet. Not all voices in the temple belonged to the living. Ghosts of Jedi, past, betrayed, forgotten, exalted, murmured through the archives and meditated in the shadows. The boy sometimes heard them, not as words, but as sensations. Echoes through time, a cold breath on his spine, a flicker behind closed eyes. Even now, the Force whispered differently to him than to the others. Not clean, not clear, like it mourned something, or waited. They called him the Chosen One, but always with hesitation, as if prophecy could be folded and stored on parchment. The ancient scrolls, half burned, half lost, spoke of one who would bring balance, but balance between what? The Jedi feared the dark, but they had forgotten the cost of clinging to the light. Light that blinds is no different than darkness, and Anakin ... was beginning to see that. He began to question, quietly, thoughtfully, why should love be a crime? Why should fear be denied rather than understood? Why must he obey those who feared him more than they nurtured him? And the more he questioned, the more the temple pulled away, like flesh recoiling from flame. It was in meditation one night, alone, beneath the statues of long-dead masters, that the Force shifted. He felt it like a tide retreating, something vast turning its head toward him, not malevolent, not kind, simply ... aware, and within that presence he heard it. Not speech, not instruction, a feeling, a truth unspoken. You are not what they want you to be. The echo passed, but it did not fade. He rose, eyes wide, breath held in reverence. The air felt thicker, the stone colder. He had touched something, or something had touched him. In the days that followed, he grew stronger. His connection deepened, but so too did the distance between him and the Order. The council spoke in riddles. They praised his skill, but questioned his spirit. They smiled, but their eyes measured him, weighed him, waiting for the moment he would tip the scales. But Anakin was not waiting. He trained harder, faster, drove his blade through simulation after simulation, until the blade was no longer separate from his hand. Victory came easily, too easily, and each triumph earned not celebration, but caution. The whispers beneath the temple stones grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. He began to sense them in his dreams. He stood in halls lined with endless doors, behind each a version of himself, some cloaked in light, others in fire, some dead, some crowned, all of them waiting. He told no one, not even Obi-Wan, not even Podman, though her face lingered. In his thoughts, like the first warmth after night, something was happening. The Force was changing. The temple was still, but the galaxy beyond it stirred. War brewed, fates shifted, and in the heart of that storm, the boy from Tatooine stood, unchosen by the Jedi, yet chosen by something far older. The prophecy was not a map, it was a warning, and no one was listening. Chapter 3. The fire behind the eyes of a boy the child was gone. In his place now stood a youth cloaked in discipline, wrapped in robes too thin to shield him from the heat that pulsed within. Anakin Skywalker, no longer the boy who dreamed beneath the suns, now moved like a weapon being forged. Each lesson a hammer, each mission a flame, yet the fire in him had never been given. It had always been there, buried beneath years of servitude and survival. It was not the fire of anger, not yet. It was the fire of hunger, a hunger not for destruction, but for meaning, for purpose, for love, for power, not to rule, but to save. And power denied becomes power distorted. The temple could not contain it. The Order could not understand it. They asked for calm, for control. But the Force did not speak to Anakin in calm. It spoke to him in storms, in visions, in waves of knowing that came unbidden and left him shaking. They assigned him missions, distant systems, skirmishes between dying guilds and rising cartels. He solved them not with patience, but with precision, not with debate, but with action. Lives were saved, but questions followed. Too reckless, they murmured, too passionate. The council began to watch him through narrowed eyes, but still they needed him, even in their doubt. They sent him forth again and again, a paradox wrapped in prophecy. Obi-Wan stood at his side, always the measured breath to Anakin's wild heart. He taught with care, corrected with patience, but love alone does not bridge the abyss. They were bonded, yes, forged by shared battles and bound duty. Yet beneath that bond, silence grew. Obi-Wan feared what he would not speak, and Anakin resented what he would not hear. He began to see it. The cracks, the dissonance within the Order. Jedi who recited the code but held fear in their gaze. Masters who preached attachment yet clung to their own reputations. They called for peace while preparing for war. They had become hollow statues of what they once were, and the boy who walked among them now carried the flame that could either relight their truth or burn it all away. But Anakin did not speak of this. Not to them. He carried the questions in secret, the doubts folded into quiet places of his mind. And to those secret places he returned each night, visiting memories as if they were temples of their own. His mother's voice, Podmess eyes, the roar of padraces, the darkness of space. And through it all, the Force, not soft, not still, but stirring. It did not guide him gently. It pulled him like a riptide, showing him flashes of what could be, what should be, what must never be. In his dreams, he stood on fields of ash, his hands wet with fire, pond crying out to him through flames he could not extinguish. He awoke breathless, trembling, his heart pounding with truths he could not explain. He began to hide it, the fear, the visions, the pain. The Jedi could not be trusted with it. They would tell him to release it, to forget, but he knew better. Forgetting leads to blindness, and blindness had destroyed too many. Padme had returned to Coruscant, her senatorial duties cloaked in diplomacy. But when Anakin saw her, even for a moment, the galaxy softened. In her presence, the flame calmed, not extinguished, but quiet. Her voice was not a command, but a bomb, and love, though forbidden, grew in the shadow of their meetings. The code was clear, but so was the Force, and the Force did not tremble in the presence of their love. It pulsed, it shimmered, but the Jedi would not accept this. Anakin knew they would tear it from him, or worse, from her. So he became two men, the Padawan who obeyed, and the man who burned in silence. Each duel he fought, each victory he won, the fire grew, not just in skill, but in certainty. The Force moved through him differently now. It didn't just respond, it followed. Lightsabers slowed in his presence. Enemies faltered at his gaze. He did not understand why, but the Force did, because beneath the robes, beneath the rules, something ancient had returned, not just power, but will. And will is what the Jedi had abandoned. They feared it in him, and fear, unspoken, breeds prophecy. One evening, after sparring, he stood alone on the temple's highest balcony. The city stretched before him like a wound, endless, bright, soulless, and beyond it, stars. He closed his eyes, and the Force reached for him, not gently, not sweetly, but with hunger. He heard it again. You were not born to serve, you were born to end. The wind howled, the stars flickered, and the fire behind his eyes opened. Chapter 4. The Battle That Named Him Night War. That is how the Jedi lost what little remained of their soul, not with death, but with duty, not with fire, but with permission. It began not in shadow, but in light. The Clone Wars, they called it. An army born in silence, commissioned in secrecy, and offered as a gift by ghosts in the Senate. And the Jedi, weary from prophecy and contradiction, accepted. They stepped into battle. Not as warriors, they claimed, but as guardians. But blades once drawn do not return clean. And so they marched, robes traded for armor, peace traded for strategy. And Anakin Skywalker, no longer a boy, not yet a man, walked into war like a flame walks into dry grass. The council knighted him. Too early, too late, not in reverence, but in desperation. The war needed symbols, and Anakin had become one, the chosen one, the youngest knight in generations. But symbols, once raised, cast long and dangerous shadows on the fields of where insects carved cathedrals of bone and sand. The war opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. The Jedi, caught in an ambush, fell one by one. Lightsabers flickered and died. Beasts roared. Machines hissed. And in the heart of the chaos, Anakin fought, not with precision, but with fury. His blade sang, not a hymn, but a dirge. Beside him, Obi-Wan fell. A gash, a scream, a falter in breath. And Anakin, bound by love, not command, charged forward. He did not hesitate. He did not retreat. He surged. Count Dooku awaited, cloaked in elegance, his voice a serpent's lullaby. The duel that followed was not clean, not noble. Dooku struck. Anakin broke. Arms severed. Pride, shattered pain, at last found him again. Like an old friend returned from the desert. The war had begun, and it had already taken something from him. They gave him a new arm, a machine of cold metal and clicking servos. It responded, faster than flesh, but it did not feel. In the nights that followed, he stared at it, flexing fingers he could not feel. A gift from the Republic, a symbol of victory. But victory, like power, always asks for something in return. Padawan was there, at his side, her touch still warm, her voice still soft. But between them now stood the war, and the code, and the silence of things unsaid. They grew closer even as the galaxy tore itself apart. Love, forbidden, became his sanctuary, the only truth not twisted by orders or counsels or lies. Anakin rose through the ranks. His command was swift, decisive. Soldiers followed him not because of his title, but because of his presence. He did not inspire loyalty. He commanded it. The clones bred for obedience saw in him not just a general, but a symbol. Where others faltered, he advanced. Where others calculated, he struck. His enemies began to fear his name, but the council, they watched. Whispers spread like cracks in marble, too aggressive, too emotional, too dangerous, yet none could deny the results. Systems liberated, battles won. The Republic praised him, the Senate celebrated him. But the Jedi, the order that had raised him, offered only silence. He had become what they needed, but not what they trusted. And still, the Force churned within him. War had awakened it further. In battle, time slowed. The Force obeyed. It bent around his will. He could see the outcome before it happened. Not always, but often enough. He did not speak of it. They would only fear it more. They would call it arrogance, or worse, darkness. But darkness was not a place. It was a choice, and choices, Anakin was learning, had already been made for him. The war stretched on, months into years. Peace became rumor, and Anakin, no longer the desert child, no longer the temple student, became something else. A knight crowned in fire, a protector with blood on his hands. He returned to the temple on brief respites between battles. It felt smaller now, quieter. The whispers beneath the stones had grown distant. The ghosts had gone silent. Only the walls remained cold, watching. He walked through them not as pupil, but as stranger, and Padma was beginning to fade from the public eye. She hid their marriage, concealed their love in the folds of duty. But love, like light, leaves traces. And soon he began to dream again, not of deserts, not of war, but of death, her death, and he could do nothing. Yet the Force offered no answers. The Jedi offered only silence. But somewhere else, beyond the temple, another voice waited, cloaked in smiles, draped in velvet and war. The voice of a friend, a mentor, a serpent, waiting to offer a truth to terrible and to tempting to ignore. Chapter 5. Dreams that bleed into waking. He no longer slept through the night. When his eyes closed, the Force did not cradle him. It cracked open the veil of time and poured dread into his mind. He saw her, Padme, his beloved, dying, not in war, not by blade, but in childbirth, blood on silk sheets, hands reaching for him, breath fading, and he helpless, screaming, watching, always too late. He would wake soaked in sweat breath, caught like a snare in his throat. The room quiet, the city distant, but the image lingered. Not a dream, no, a vision. The Force had spoken. It always spoke. But this time, it did not whisper. It screamed. He tried to tell her. Padme, radiant even in worry, brushed the fears away with soft smiles and gentle hands. It's just stress. The war, the council. But he knew, deep in his marrow, this was no illusion. The Force had shown him what was coming. And the Force did not lie, only twist, only tempt. The council, when approached, offered nothing. Premonitions are not certainties, they said. Let go of fear, they said. Mourn not the future. Words spoken by those who had never lost, never been born in chains, never had everything taken by time and silence. Anakin left the chamber colder than when he entered. The Jedi taught detachment, but detachment had no place in love, in fatherhood. Yes, Padme was with child, his child, their child. Another secret hidden behind veils and lies. He should have rejoiced, but all he could feel was doomed that he wandered the temple at night, seeking answers in halls grown unfamiliar. The archives were silent. The Force ghosted around him, evasive, heavy. He stood beneath the statues of old masters, their eyes carved with purpose now long extinguished. Tell me what to do, he whispered. No reply. Only the wind through the open windows, like breath withheld by the galaxy. And so, in despair, he turned to the only one who listened. Palpatine, the Chancellor, the friend, the ever-present shadow behind the Republic's throne. He saw Anakin suffering and did not dismiss it. He did not offer riddles. He offered understanding. They met in quiet chambers behind marble doors, where gold banners masked ancient rot. Palpatine listened, nodded, spoke not as ruler, but as confidant. He told tales, old legends, forbidden truths, of Sith who once defied death, of powers the Jedi forbade not because they were evil, but because they were true. Anakin listened, not with belief, not yet, but with hunger. What would you do to save her? Palpatine asked softly, eyes gleaming. Anything, Anakin replied, and in that answer something ancient stirred. He returned to the temple, face calm, soul torn. Each lesson with Obi-Wan now felt thin, brittle. Each meditation a prison. The council spoke of peace, but demanded war. They ordered him to spy on Palpatine, the very man who had offered him hope. They clothed betrayal in robes of duty. Pom saw the change. In his words, his eyes, his voice. He began to hide his pain behind silence. Not to protect her, but because he knew she would not understand what he was becoming. He was not falling. He was reaching beyond the veil the Jedi had wrapped around him, reaching for truth, for power, for salvation. The visions worsened. He saw Padme again, only now her voice blamed him, her eyes hollow, her death his fault. He awoke gasping, his mechanical hand clutching the edge of the bed, hard enough to crack durasteel. She stirred. Beside him, he wept without sound. He began to meditate in secret, Not the Jedi way, a new way, his way. He called to the Force, not in peace, but in demand. Show me the path, he begged. Let me change it. But the Force offered no light, only possibility. Palpatine's words circled his thoughts like carrion birds. There is a way, a power, a will stronger than death, but it requires letting go of the Jedi lies. He no longer knew where the lie began. Was it in the code? The Council, his own heartbeat? He had done everything they asked, fought their war, obeyed their commands, silenced his love, buried his fear. And still, they offered only rejection, only doubt, only chains. He began to believe that perhaps the Jedi were not guardians of peace, but hoarders of it, that their fear of the dark was not wisdom, but cowardice. And still, Padme's time drew near. The war escalated. The galaxy groaned beneath its weight. Planets burned. Loyalties cracked. Anakin stood on the edge, not of battle, but of decision, to trust the Jedi, who had failed him, or to trust the darkness, which offered him everything. One night, in the temple's oldest chamber, he knelt not to a master, not to the council, but to the silence between stars. The Force pulsed around him, thick, suffocating. He closed his eyes, and for the first time he heard it. You know what must be done, not a command, not a curse, a truth. And in that truth, a beginning. Chapter 6. The serpent draped in velvet, he moved through the city as a shadow clothed in robes. The war thundered outside, a storm of blasters, fleets and falling banners. But here, in the Chancellor's private sanctum, silence ruled. Anakin stood before the one man who made sense in a galaxy gone blind. Palpatine sat not as ruler, but as confidant. His voice was soft, not commanding, but inviting. Each word laced with warmth, yet coiled in secrets. Around him, luxury whispered. Curtains of crimson, statues of forgotten empires. Candles flickered without breeze. The air to still. Time itself seemed to wait. You seek a way, Palpatine said, to save the one you love from a death that should not come. Anakin did not deny it. The serpent knew the hunger before the heart confessed it. And so, he spoke of Darth Plagueis, not as myth, but as memory. A Sith Lord so powerful he could bend the Force to cheat death, not for himself, but for others. He taught his apprentice everything, the Chancellor said, voice lowering, reverent, as if reciting scripture lost to fire. But the apprentice killed him in his sleep. Anakin listened, his hands cold, his heart louder than his breath. This was not a story, this was an answer. The Jedi had taught him to let go, but he had done that already. As a child, he let go of his mother. She died screaming, and the Jedi offered only silence. Now they would have him let go of Padme, to trust the Force, to wait, but he would not wait. He had seen what waiting brought. Palpatine smiled gently, watching him not as a pawn but as prophecy. They don't trust you, he said, and it was true, they fear your power. Also true, they will never teach you the power you seek. Not even a lie, only a wound pressed open. Anakin stood at the edge of something vast. The Force coiled beneath his feet like a sea before the quake. Every instinct told him to retreat, but instinct had been wrong before, had told him to trust the Council, had told him to stay silent, had told him Padme would live, so he listened. Night after night, the Chancellor revealed more of the Sith, of the Force, of the balance that was never balance, only control. He spoke of passion as strength, of emotion as a path, not a poison. Through passion I gained strength, he said, reciting not with threat, but with grace. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. Chains, Anakin had known chains since birth, and here, at last, stood one who offered the key. But the Jedi, they watched. They questioned. They felt the tremor in him, but refused to name it. They tasked him with a betrayal cloaked in righteousness. To spy on the Chancellor, to become their eyes, their weapon, but never their equal. Anakin obeyed, outwardly, inwardly. The fracture deepened. He sat with Obi-Wan beneath the glow of a temple lamp, his master's voice full of concern. Be careful of Palpatine. He's not what he seems. But Anakin heard judgment, not concern. They want to use you, Obi-Wan had said. But so did the Council. So did everyone. Everyone. But him, Palpatine did not use. He offered, and Padme saw the change, his gaze more distant, his hands trembling, his words brief and hollow. She tried to reach him. Talk to me, she whispered. But how could he speak of this? Of the darkness coiling around his dreams, of the light fading from his faith. He feared losing her more than he feared damnation, and the serpent saw it. Swear yourself to me, Palpatine said one night, voice barely more than breath, and I will teach you to keep her alive, not with power stolen, with power earned. The Force shifted. It did not resist. It watched Anakin, Jedi Knight, hero of the Republic, chosen one of a broken prophecy. Said nothing. He did not need to. His silence was consent. His heart had already turned, not out of hate, but out of love, the purest corruption of all. Chapter 7, A. Temple without light. The Jedi Temple once stood as a mountain of peace upon the plains of Coruscant, unmoving, unshaken, unmoved by war. Its towers pierced the sky like blades cloaked in silence. But now the silence cracked, not with sound, but with fracture. Something within was breaking, not the stone, but the soul. Anakin walked its corridors like a ghost. Every wall remembered him, every arch had watched him grow. Yet now the halls recoiled, as if sensing what he had become. The Force there, once warm, once open, now whispered suspicion and judgment and fear. The Council summoned him, their eyes heavy with knowledge. They would not share. Mace Windu, his voice always edged in steel, spoke of concerns, of the Chancellor, of influence. You will watch him, he said, and report his movements. A request, a command, a confession. They did not trust Palpatine. They did not trust Anakin. He nodded. But something cold slipped behind his heart and stayed there. They needed him. They used him, but never believed in him. Not truly, not once. The Chosen One, a title given in desperation, not in reverence. A prophecy clung to, not understood. Balance they feared what it meant, because balance does not come without cost. Balance means the light must fall as the dark rises. They sensed his torment, but offered only lectures. They saw his fear of Padme's death, of helplessness, of loss, but named it weakness. They taught him to let go, but they never taught him how. The temple became a cage, and every day the war outside grew worse. Stars burned, Republic fleets crumbled, and through it all, Palpatine remained calm, constant, composed. The war could not touch him. His voice carried not orders, but comfort. "The Jedi would betray the Republic," he said softly. "They do not see the future, Anakin. You do, and he did." He saw it clearly now. The Jedi, blinded by tradition, would bring only failure. Their inaction had birthed this war. Their dogma had killed his mother. Their fear would let Padam die. He no longer believed they were guardians of peace, only sentinels of their own decline, and the Council, desperate, drowning, reached out too late. They offered him a seat on the Council, but not the rank of Master A. Mockery, no Jedi Knight had ever been given that seat without the title. A seat in name, but not in power, not in trust. Anakin sat among them that day, the sun casting long shadows across the chamber floor. His face was still, his rage not. The Force burned within him, not wild-focused. They had made their choice, so he made his. That night he returned to Padma, but held her like she was already slipping away. She saw it in his eyes, the distance, the weight. She begged him to speak. "What's happening to you?" And all he could say was, "I'm doing this for you." He began to meditate again, but not on peace, on control, on power. His mind turned inward, seeking the path the Jedi had forbidden. He searched the temple archives for fragments, for lost techniques, for secrets buried under generations of fear. But always they were missing, redacted, destroyed, hidden. The Jedi did not merely ignore the dark. They feared it, because they knew it was stronger than they would admit, and in that fear they had already lost. The Clone War raged louder. Grievous hunted in the Outer Rim. Jedi died in distant systems. Obi-Wan prepared to leave once more, seeking the final strike. They stood together, master and apprentice, beneath the ships departing into twilight. "You've become a far greater Jedi than I could ever hope to be," Obi-Wan said. Anakin tried to smile, tried to believe it, but truth did not warm him. Truth was no longer what it once had been. That night, the Force called him again, but it was not the Jedi Temple that answered. It was him, Palpatine. Cloaked in velvet and eternity, spoke the truth Anakin had begun to accept. "I am the Sith, Lord, you seek." Not a threat, not a confession, gift. And the air went still. The galaxy inhaled, and destiny held its breath. Chapter 8. The Blood. Baptism of Darth Vader, the moment shattered time. The words, "I am the Sith Lord you seek," did not fall. Like thunder, they slipped like poison into a chalice already half drunk. Palpatine did not flinch, did not rise. He merely watched, calm, knowing, offering not threat, but destiny. Anakin stood in silence, not denial, not disbelief, but recognition. The path was no longer hidden. The veil had been drawn, and behind it stood not a monster, but the only one who had ever answered his fear with truth. "You know the Jedi would kill me," Palpatine said softly, the candlelight dancing in his eyes like stars dying in a black sea, "without trial, without mercy, because I threaten their control, just as you do." Anakin's breath trembled. "I can teach you," the Sith Lord whispered, "what they never would, not to destroy, not to conquer, but to save her Padam." Her name echoed like a prayer carved into stone, and in that sacred terror, the fear of her death, the certainty of his failure, he found clarity. He left the chamber with shaking hands and a storm inside his chest. He told the Council, told Mace Windu what he had learned. But even then, even there, the fracture deepened. "Stay behind," Windu commanded. If what you've said is true, then you will have earned my trust. Even now they withheld belief, as if he had not bled for them, as if prophecy were a leash, not a crown. He watched them fly. The Jedi Masters, blades ready, hearts uncertain. They would confront Sidious, they would kill him. And with him, the only hope Anakin had left of saving the one thing that mattered. The sun was setting. He stood in the war-torn corridors of the temple, the golden light casting his shadow long across the floor. He turned and walked into night. The office was silent when he returned, but not still. Power stirred in the corners, not raw, but focused, like a beast with ancient eyes. Lightsabers ignited. The clash came fast. Masters fell, one by one. Windu remained, fierce, unyielding. The two titans locked in combat. The room a blur of blade and breath. Anakin watched. He did not move until Windu stood victorious, until the blade was raised, and then he chose. His own saber ignited, and he struck. The scream was short. The body fell. The war was over. But peace did not come, only silence, and in that silence, the Sith Lord rose. You are fulfilling your destiny, Anakin, he said, voice echoing not just in air, but in the Force itself. Kneel. And he did. Not as a Jedi, not as a knight, as a man who had sacrificed his soul to hold back death. You shall be known as Darth Vader. The name did not sting, it sealed, it bound. A baptism not in water, but in blood. And so the galaxy shifted. The chosen one was no longer a myth. He was now a weapon, a will given form, and his first task was home, the temple. He marched through its gates not as protector, but as purge. Troopers followed, blades ignited. The halls screamed. Children ran, masters fell, statues cracked. The past was burned clean by the fire of betrayal. He did not weep. He did not falter. The Force flowed through him, not gentle, not light, but strong, so strong. And somewhere, beneath the dying embers of the temple, the Force whispered, not in words, but in mourning. The balance had shifted, and the darkness was not coming. It had already arrived. Chapter 9. The Empire born in smoke. The smoke still clung to the city like a second sky, where once stood harmony. Only ash now lingered. The Jedi Temple, silent, shattered, defiled. Its spires cracked against the heavens like broken fingers. The archives burned. The children silenced. The statues of ancient masters lay fallen, their stone faces eroded by fire and blaster marks. No wind blew, no birds cried, only the crackling breath of ruin remained. At its heart stood Darth Vader, no longer Anakin Skywalker, no longer Jedi, no longer son of prophecy, but a man unmoored from light. His robes were darker now. His eyes, rimmed in yellow fire, reflected no mercy. He looked upon the temple's smouldering bones, not with regret, but with cold purpose. This was not vengeance, it was rebirth. Above the clouds, the Senate roared, with applause. Palpatine, now cloaked, not only in red, but in legend, declared the Republic dead. In its place, an empire, secure, unified, strong. No more war, no more division, only peace, enforced by iron. The senators clapped, but their hands built a tomb amid the firelight. Padme watched from the shadows, her eyes wide, breath caught, heart unraveling. What if the Republic we thought we were serving no longer exists? She whispered to Bail, to Organar, to silence. The man she loved, the man she married, had become something else. She could feel it, like a cold echo through her bones. Anakin no longer came to her with warmth. He came cloaked in mission, purpose. "I've brought peace," he said. "I've ended the war." And yet his touch was distant, his words sharp, as if every syllable cost him something he no longer had. She spoke of fear, of change, of loss. He spoke of control, of survival, of order. And through it all, he said, "I'm doing this for you." But love given in chains is not love at all. Far across the galaxy, Obi-Wan found the bodies, Younglings, cut down by the hand of one they called brother. He read the security recordings, saw the blade, saw the eyes, heard the name the boy now carried. Vader, and he could not breathe. The war had ended, but not with peace, with execution. Jedi hunted like animals. One by one, scattered across star systems. They were rooted out by Order 66, a phrase whispered through clone veins, turning loyalty into murder. Even those who trusted him died with his name on their lips. Anakin. But Anakin was no more. On Mustafar, he strode through the Black Citadel, slaughtering the separatist leaders with ease. They begged, they offered riches, treaties, obedience. He offered silence. The blood ran down molten floors. Their screams were lost beneath the thunder of lava. The last war had ended. The new one had begun, and far above. In a Senate that no longer served the people, a Sith Lord ruled without fear. For beside him now stood a knight, forged not in fire, but in loss, and behind that knight trailed smoke and silence, and the sound of a prophecy bleeding out beneath the weight of its own false light. The galaxy did not cheer for freedom, it cheered for chains. Chapter 10. The jewel beneath dying suns. 2 suns hung in the sky, heavy and mournful, like the last eyes of gods, too weary to intervene. Mustafar burned beneath them, a world of fire and wrath, where the very ground bled. Rivers of molten rock flowed through jagged chasms, and ash fell like snow from a heaven long abandoned. This was no battlefield. This was judgment. And into that judgment walked Obi-Wan Kenobi, cloaked in dust and sorrow. He had followed the trail of death. The corpses of separatists still lay warm, blaster holes steaming, the stench of slaughter not yet stale. But it was not war he had found. It was execution, the precision of rage. The handwriting of a fallen brother Pad had come first, desperate, trembling, still believing in the man she loved. She had seen the visions, felt the distance, and yet her heart whispered his name like a prayer it refused to unlearn. Anakin stood at the edge of a platform above lava, robes billowing, eyes lit with fire and betrayal. She reached for him. He looked past her. "You're with him," he said. "You brought him here to kill me," she gasped, confusion, grief. Then collapse, and as she fell, Obi-Wan emerged from the shadow of the ship. Anakin's eyes met his, and the galaxy shuddered. There were no greetings, no apologies, no last chance, only destiny. "You turned her against me. You have done that yourself." Blades ignited, sky met fire, and so began the duel, not between Jedi and Sith, but between brothers. The clash was more than battle. It was prophecy unspooling. The Force howled through their movements. Every strike echoed through history. They fought not for victory, but for truth. And the truth, unbearable, bled through every wound. Obi-Wan, wounded by love, Anakin devoured. By it, from gantries to walkways, Across crumbling towers and rivers of flame, they moved like storms made flesh. Neither held back, because both knew this would not end with surrender. It would end with loss. "I have brought peace," Anakin roared, eyes blazing. "Freedom, security. I have done what the Jedi never could." "You were the chosen one," Obi-Wan cried. "It was said you would destroy the Sith, not join them." Flames licked the edges of their words. "I hate you. I loved you." They leapt upon a narrow platform floating down a molten river, the final crucible. The Force itself seemed to recoil, as if even it could not watch. Obi-Wan found the high ground. Anakin, driven by pride and pain, struck anyway. One swing, one choice, and it was done. The scream tore through stone and sky. Anakin's body fell to the embankment, legs severed, arm gone, fire licking at his robes. The heat consumed him, but he did not die. Not yet. Obi-Wan stood over him, the blade still humming, the tears silent. "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." He took the LIGHTSABER. He walked away. Behind him, the man he once knew was no longer a man, only a husk, burning in silence. A new form was coming, a shape to match the ruin within. Flesh replaced by iron, voice swallowed by machine, breath made mechanical. The dark side had won, but at what cost? The suns above, like witnesses without mercy, watched the chosen one fall, not into death, but into endless life, and the name Anakin Skywalker was buried beneath the ashes. Chapter 11. The mask that breathes there was no light in the chamber. Where he awoke, only shadow, metal, and the hiss of life returned by force. He did not open his eyes. He had none. What remained of them saw through lenses, filters, black glass, polished not for clarity, but for concealment. He tried to scream, but the sound that emerged was not human. It was hunger. A machine gave him breath. A machine gave him voice. A machine gave him life. And yet, nothing living remained. Palpatine stood beside the table of steel, robes draped like mourning cloth. His face, ruined by the power he wielded, smiled without joy. "You are alive, Lord Vader," he said. "You are reborn." Anakin Skywalker had died on Mustafar. What stood now was something else, something forged. The table tilted. Chains. Released, he rose, tall, monstrous, silent but for the rasping cry of the respirator. The mask sealed to his skull whispered one sound. Suffering, he staggered, then stood still. The Force surrounded him still, but it did not sing. It groaned. "What of Padawan?" he asked, voice echoing through the void of his new form. Palpatine's answer was venom laced in honey. A whisper, it seems. "In your anger, you killed her." A silence deeper than death settled, and in that silence, everything broke. The cry that followed was not a man's. It was the death scream of prophecy, the collapse of hope. The Force trembled, droids recoiled, walls cracked. The very air recoiled from him. This was not grief, it was cataclysm. An ocean of love reversed into a blade of pain. Palm was gone. And so the reason had vanished. The purpose, the lie. He had sacrificed everything to save her, and failed. Now only the power remained, and pain to justify it. Palpatine did not comfort. He watched. The mask clicked. The breathing resumed. The man did not fall. He stood across the stars. The galaxy changed shape. Jedi were hunted, cornered, betrayed, eliminated. Some fought, most fled, but none escaped the shadow. The empire expanded, like ink in water, bleeding through systems, through laws, through the hearts of men. The clones obeyed. The Senate cheered. The people complied. And at the head of this dark procession walked the one called Vader. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He executed with precision, with silence, with flame. Worlds trembled at the sound of his breath. Children cried at the name. His blade was crimson, his cape like night, his presence a void in the Force itself. But in secret, he remembered, the dreams did not end. He saw her still Padme, not as she died, but as she smiled. The memory, twisted, became torment. He returned to Naboo in silence, never stepping foot on the soil, only watching from orbit. A tomb in his soul stood forever open. Obi-Wan vanished. The Emperor never spoke his name again. It was as if Skywalker had never lived. History was rewritten. The Clone Wars reframed. The Jedi blamed. The Temple desecrated, and Vader. He was myth made manifest, yet beneath it all, beneath armor and title and terror, the boy from Tatooine still stirred, small, silent, afraid, but the voice of the child was quiet now, and the voice of the machine never stopped. Chapter 12. The Ghost in the Force. He walked among the dead without knowing their names. Ruins, temples, corpses long cold. Systems where Jedi once lit the stars with hope, now dim, buried, silent. Vader moved through them like a spectre in black, his cape dragging ash, his breath the rhythm of execution. Each world held echoes, each tomb a whisper, and the Force groaned, not in rage, in grief. They said the Jedi were gone, but the Force does not forget its children. It remembers. On the frozen cliffs of Jagoda Prime, he found the bones of Master Telerai, her saber, still gripped in her frostbitten fingers. On the shattered moon of Morash, he struck down the twin. Brothers of the Ashlon sect, defenders of light who did not beg when they died. On Jihara, the stars wept, but one escaped. Obi-1. His name was forbidden, erased from reports, banished from record. Yet in Vader's dreams, the old master still lived, always just beyond reach, just beyond voice, the one who cut him down, the one who walked away, the one who let her die. Sometimes, Vader stood still in the quiet of his obsidian chamber aboard the Executor. The stars blurred beyond the viewport. He would say nothing, move not at all, only listen for him, for any sign, and sometimes the Force would stir faintly, as if Obi-Wan were out there, not hiding, waiting. Elsewhere the Empire swelled, entire, systems conscripted, planets harvested, wills broken, descent crushed beneath the march of stormtroopers and the echo of a single mechanical breath. And yet, even as he enforced the Emperor's will, Vader was not whole. The power was his, the fear was his, but the vision, the purpose, had died with her, and so he obeyed Palpatine, not as apprentice, as tool. Go here, he went, kill them. He did, but in silence he began to wonder, not loudly, not in words, only in fragments, only in pain, and the Emperor felt it. Your mind is distracted, he hissed. You must sever the past. The Jedi, the girl, the boy. The boy, yes, the boy, for Padme had died pregnant, and that truth, buried beneath lies, had begun to sprout its first roots. The Force shifted. Light flickered at the galaxies. EDGA spark survived, not in temples, not in archives, but in blood. Vader felt it. Not clearly, not consciously, but like a ghost brushing the edge of his cold mind. Skywalker, not a name, a future, a threat, a chance. He turned from the Emperor's throne with nothing said but everything decided. The past was not finished. It had merely become a shadow, and in the silence between stars, the ghost began to move. Chapter 13. The spark the Empire could not kill it began, not with thunder, but with a whisper, not with fleets or fire, but with a name. Luke, carried through transmissions, hidden in codes, spoken by rebels with trembling breath, as if the name itself might bring ruin or salvation. Skywalker, Vader, heard it first on a whispering moon above the ice fields of Polaris. A rebel cell captured, tortured, broken. One word kept surfacing, not as a leader, not yet. As a rumor, a pilot, a boy, a Skywalker. He stood motionless in the cell's darkness, visor lit by dying power cells, listening to the prisoner's voice as it cracked with blood and fear. He destroyed the Death Star. The breath in Vader's mask caught, not stopped, but twisted. He turned, left without a word, and on his ship, alone, he reached into the currents of the Force. What answered was not clarity, but recognition. A thread, a flicker. He searched back, through memory, through death, through screams, and in that darkness, he found her Pom, lying beneath the stars of Polis Macedot, lips blue, eyes still, and Obi-Wan's voice. She was alive when we brought her in, but the boy he had never asked. He had been told she died. Along with the child, a lie, a shield, and it shattered now like glass. Beneath prophecy, the boy was real. The blood was his, and the Force trembled, not in resistance, but in anticipation. Palpatine felt it too, but he spoke not in fear, in greed. A new enemy, a boy strong in the Force. He will be our downfall, or our legacy. But Vader said nothing. He did not kneel. He did not answer. In the silence of his chamber, he stood before the stars, and the name repeated again in the core of his soul. Luke he saw, flashes, not visions, memories not lived. A boy with his eyes, her smile, a saber in hand, hope igniting. In rebellion, not yet, but soon. The galaxy was changing, and this spark, this sun, would light a fire the Empire could never smother. On Hoth, he came close. Too close, through ice and fire he pursued, the Force pulling him like a compass. He did not yet know, not for certain, but he felt it. The duel in the carbon chamber of Bespin was not a battle, it was a summons. Luke fought like a flame, just born wild, bright, unrefined. But behind every swing was a heartbeat Vader, recognized. And when the boy fell, wounded, desperate, trembling above the void, Vader spoke. Not as a hunter, not as a lord, but as a father. I am your father. The galaxy seemed to shudder in its orbit. Luke screamed, not in denial of truth, but in the agony of inheritance. He chose the fall, the void, rather than accept the blood that called him. But blood is patient, and the Force does not forget. Vader stood in silence, the chasm yawning below. The boy gone, but not lost, not anymore. The spark had survived, and now it had a name. Chapter 14. The Rebellion and the Rise of the Heir the Galaxy Burned. But in the flames, something new stirred. Not order, not control, but resistance. They called it the Rebellion, a scatter of systems, of ragged ships and borrowed courage rising from ashes. It should have been crushed. It had no fleet, no senate, no Jedi, only a symbol, faint, flickering, but bright enough to defy the darkness. Luke Skywalker. He was no longer a rumor, no longer a whisper. He was a name that moved between stars like prophecy reborn. The Empire hunted him, from dry moons to gas giants, from hidden bases carved in snow to fleets stitched from scrap. Vader followed not as commander, but as predator. The Force pulled him, a thread tight as wire, from shadow to shadow. And yet, the boy evaded him, not with power, with purpose. Leia, Han Chewbacca, droids once belonging to another life. They stood at his side, not as soldiers, as anchors. They kept the boy from slipping too far, too fast. But the Force surged in him. All the same, Vader felt it. Every time they neared, the tremor grew stronger. The seed of the Chosen One's blood now bursting into flame. And yet, Luke did not hate. Even after Bespin, even after truth carved itself into his soul like a wound that never closed, he did not seek vengeance. He sought understanding. That was what terrified the Emperor. Most, not the saber, not the name, the compassion. It made the boy unpredictable, dangerous, and so. Sidious smiled, as he always did, with venom behind teeth. "Bring him to me," he hissed. "He can destroy us, or become us." But Vader, in the silence of his black chamber, thought of something else, of a boy born in the sand, of a mother lost in chains, of Padme whispering, "There is still good in him." Luke was not a mirror. He was a fork in the path, and yet Vader was no longer sure which path was his. The rebellion grew bolder. Their numbers swelled. They struck not just with weapons, but with belief, and every time Luke appeared, hope surged in the hearts of those who had forgotten its taste. On Ender's moon, he surrendered, not with fear, with faith. "I sense the conflict in you," Luke said to the Black Mask. "Let go of your hate." Vader did not respond. He couldn't. The words were not foreign. They were familiar, like something spoken long ago, by lips now dust. The Emperor welcomed the boy as a spider welcomes prey. Palpatine's throne room was a crucible of black marble and cold stars. The lightning in his fingers danced with promise and punishment alike. "Strike me down. Join your father. Let the hate flow." But Luke resisted, even when pain laced his nerves, even when the Emperor's laugh echoed like thunder. Across time, he looked to Vader, not with fear, but with hope. And in that gaze, something cracked. A tremor, not in the Force, but in the soul of the thing that once was Anakin Palpatine. Felt it too. "You are weak, Lord Vader," he sneered. "Just like your father before you." But the voice that answered did not speak. It moved, lightning arced. A scream was torn from Sith lips. The throne shattered. The galaxy turned. Air had risen. But the father was not yet whole. Not yet. Chapter 15. The Death of Palpatine. The rebirth of Skywalker. The throne room was drowning in stormlight. Forks of blue lightning screamed from the Emperor's hands, twisting through the boy's body, snapping bone, searing flesh, ripping howls from Luke's throat. And still, he did not give in, his saber gone, his strength failing, but his gaze, steady dot, not on Palpatine, on him, on Vader. The son called, not for mercy, but for memory. "Father, one word, one final chance." The Force screamed in that moment. The galaxy stilled. and within the tomb of durasteel and wires, the ember flickered, not in rage, not in hate, but in remembrance of who he was, who he could still be. Anakin Skywalker did not rise. He returned, and in that instant, that divine fracture of fate, Darth Vader made his final choice. He turned. Palpatine did not believe it. His triumph was complete, his creation perfect, his dominion eternal. But in that blindness, as in all Sith, he forgot one truth. Love is more powerful than fear. The hands that once strangled Jedi now reached not in anger, but in sacrifice. He lifted the Emperor from the ground like broken prophecy. Lightning scorched his armor, tore into his wiring, melted synthetic flesh. But he did not let go. Not until the scream turned to silence, not until the throne shattered, not until evil died. Palpatine fell, and the galaxy breathed. Vader collapsed beside. His son, smoke curled from his suit. Systems failed. The respirator stuttered, faltered, ceased. The mask, once a symbol of dread, now a prison of fading time. Luke knelt. "I have to save you," he whispered, but the voice that rose, broken, soft, human, said, "You already have." With trembling hands, Luke removed the mask. Beneath, it was not a monster, not a Sith, not a myth, only a man, a father, pale, scarred, but free. Eyes once yellow were now clear, full of sorrow, yes, but peace. "Tell your sister, you were right," Anakin breathed. And then, silence. No more pain, no more lies, only the Force. It took him not as judgment, but as welcome. Across the stars, the Death Star began to die. But Luke did not run. He built a pyre, not for a villain, but for a redeemed. The fire rose, high and sacred, as if the Force itself bowed. The armor burned. The shadow lifted. And with it, the name Vader turned to ashes. Only Skywalker remained. Not in form, in legacy, and far away. Beneath twin suns now rising, the Force whispered once more. The Chosen One had brought balance, not through war, not through command, but through love, through sacrifice, through return. Chapter 16, Balance. Paid in blood and flame, the stars did not cheer. They mourned. Balance is not peace. It is not light. It is not victory sung by the living. Balance is a reckoning, a toll paid in blood, in silence, in choices that leave ash where glory might have bloomed. The prophecy had spoken of one who would destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. But prophecy does not weep for how that balance is struck. It does not tremble for the broken hearts it requires. It only watches, and now it was fulfilled. Through death, through flame, through a love buried beneath darkness, and clawed back into light. Anakin Skywalker, born of no father, shaped by chains, crowned by war, broken by fear, reborn by love, was no longer a warning. He was a truth. The galaxy awoke. The rebellion stood no longer as shadow. It rose, fire-forged, blood-fed, carried on the backs of the dead. Worlds that had knelt now lifted their faces. Statues of the Emperor fell. Flags burned. The Empire fractured. Stormtroopers cast down helmets. The scream of the oppressed became the roar of the many. But in the Force there was quiet, a stillness not heard in centuries. The dark did not vanish. The light did not triumph. They stood equal, opposite, interwoven like breath and heartbeat. For balance is not the end of night, it is the embrace of both day and dusk. Luke stood among the ruins, saber dimmed, cloak torn. He had not won a war. He had ended a lineage, the final cry of the old Jedi, the last ember of the Sith. He had not saved his father. He had redeemed him. That is a deeper power, one no order ever taught. He felt Anakin now, not as ghost, not as echo, but as presence. Quiet, whole, not demanding, not instructing, merely there and in the forests of Endor. As the fire consumed the mask, Luke let go. But the galaxy remembered. Some called it the end of an era, but others, those who watched the stars, who listened in meditation, who dreamed in the Force, knew better. This was not the end. This was the moment the Force breathed again, a breath long held since the days of the first schism, since Jedi and Sith became mirror and enemy, since power became possession. The balance had been broken for ages, and now, finally, the scales stood still. But stillness is not forever. New darkness waits, always, and light must always choose to rise. The story of Anakin Skywalker, of Vader, of the boy who was both destroyer and deliverer, is not a warning, it is a pattern, one that will repeat, because the Force is not safe. It is alive, and all things alive. Hunger. Chapter 17. Echoes after the full silence draped the galaxy like a burial shroud. The tyrant was dead. The Death Star had crumbled. The people sang of freedom, danced in the streets of Coruscant, lit fires on Chandrila, tore down statues on Corellia, but the Force did not sing, it listened, because balance is not celebration, it is the weight that follows after the blade is sheathed. And in the wake of Anakin Skywalker's final breath, the Force did not rest. It remembered, not with clarity, but with ache. For the echoes of such a soul do not simply vanish, they echo. Luke walked alone through morning forests, where ash still clung to bark and sunlight could not cleanse what fire had burned. The mask was gone, the man too, but the questions remained. What now? Who would rebuild? What path could follow a story so complete, so filled with ruin? He carried the saber still, not his own, but his father's, the blade that had slain Sith and younglings alike. It hummed not with evil nor good, only memory. He would build something new, he said, a new order, a gentler way, not of control, but understanding. But even he did not yet see how long the shadow truly stretched. Leia, his sister, felt it too. The inheritance, not just of blood, but of burden. Her lineage, hidden for so long, was now truth. Daughter of Anakin's sister, of Skywalker, child of flame and empire. Yet she chose to lead, not as Jedi daughters hope, and the Force stirred in her quietly, like a river beneath glass. The Emperor was gone, yes, but the rot he fed remained. Moths retreated into the dark. Secrets slithered from broken temples. Weapons built in silence began to flicker awake. The dark side never sleeps. It waits, even now, in the corners of the galaxy. There were those who still whispered his name. Vader, not in hatred, but in worship, a symbol, a figure of fire and certainty. His deeds had not vanished, only changed form, and the Force watched. For even after balance, cycles crave return. It remembered the first war, the schism, the ones, Mortis, Bogan, and Ashla, every rise, every fall. The darkness was not an interruption, it was woven, and Skywalker, the name, now echoed across it all. Not just the father, not just the son, but the myth, the pain, the pattern. There would be others, there must be, because peace is not a destiny, it is a pause, and already in distant systems the embers stirred. The force shifted. Chapter 18. The myth that refuses to die the fire has long since faded. The ash has settled, statues crumbled, names rewritten, and still the myth lives, not in archives, not in datapads, but in the force. It does not forget, it only waits. Anakin Skywalker was not the first. He will not be the last. The chosen one, that sacred title, etched in prophecy and blood, is a mirror, a lesson, a wound. He was slave, savior, soldier, traitor, shadow, father, ghost. He was the war, and now he is legend, unworld scorched. By old battles, pilgrims still whisper the tale of the boy with no father, of the Jedi with too much fear, of the monster with burning eyes, of the man who cast down darkness, not with a blade, but with love. Children draw the helmet in dust, elders warn of its return, but none know the truth, not as we do, for we have seen the fracture from within, we, who linger in the old places, in temples buried beneath jungle roots, in kyber shards shattered by betrayal, in the crypts of Sith Lords who laugh without breath. We feel the echoes every time another dares to claim the Force, dares to wield it like a tool. His shadow flickers behind them. Vader, Skywalker, Anakin, the one who was all things, and still none of them, because power does not end, it only changes shape, and stories, true stories, do not die, they grow, teeth, and in some distant star, the Force will whisper again. It will find another vessel, another hope, another threat, and when it does, the myth of Anakin will rise anew, not as memory, but as warning. The Force is not your ally. It is not your weapon. It is not your servant. It is the breath between death and rebirth, and those who think themselves chosen must pay the price of balance. He brought it once, but balance is not eternal. It is fragile, and somewhere, even now, it begins to break. We will be waiting in shadow, in silence, in story, and when the cycle begins again, when the stars align, when the blade hums and the voice cries out, "I am your father," they will not understand that they are stepping into a tale already written, a loop already turning. The end of Anakin Skywalker is not the end, it is the beginning of the myth that refuses to die, of the echo that lives in all who reach too far, of the fire that burns, even in peace, balance, betrayal, return. The prophecy was not wrong, it was merely incomplete, and so we close the holocron, for now.